Okay, welcome to everybody joining. And just remember to keep yourselves muted. And yeah. One more person waiting in the waiting room. And we'll give a couple more people some more minutes to just see if anybody's going to join on before the presentation starts. Welcome to everybody. Seems like we have everybody muted. That's perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. We're excited to get started pretty soon. So I think I'll just give it another minute or two and just make sure that we have everybody here who wants to join. And then at about 11:01, 11:02, we'll get started. Got somebody in the waiting room coming in. Welcome. Okay. Just a couple. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start. Okay, thank you all for joining us today for our virtual talk. Please keep yourselves muted, as I said before, throughout the presentation. And if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box at the bottom of your screen. There will also be a portion during the middle of the presentation where Barb will ask if you guys have any questions as well. And allow yourselves to be unmuted then as well. Our speakers will be happy to address any questions at the end of the program as well. If you're joining us over Facebook Live, welcome to you as well. Our Facebook audience can also ask questions using the comment section on Facebook. Please note that this talk is being recorded and streamed live and will be posted to our social media channels once the talk is over. If you would like to rewatch this talk or watch previous virtual tours and talks, please check out our YouTube or Facebook pages. I'm excited to introduce our speakers to you, Jerry and Barbara. Their talk is entitled Artists Overcoming Obstacles Through Hope, Humanity, and Creativity. Thank you, Jerry and Barbara.
And thank you, Blythe. I'm Barb Morgan, and I'll be the first part of our duo today with our topic that Blythe just read to us again. As a beginning, I would like to remind you that when we present on Zoom, it's harder to do interaction, but we try. And so what we'd like to do, as Blythe already alluded, in the middle and at the end, we'd like to stop and see if there are any comments or questions or additions that you will have included in the chat room. And what reminded me of that was about a month ago, one of our fellow docents, Manny Pia, was talking about this same endeavor, that we want more interaction with people out there that we can't see. And he reminded us all that we who are docents, we are not sages on a stage. We're not the only ones who have all the answers on everything we present. And oftentimes you who are viewing it have additions too. So we look forward to that. And with that, I would like to add that we're also each other's guides on the side. So with that, we might be able to capture a little bit more than what merely Jerry and I have researched and will be willing to share with you today. Going along with our title now, Artists Conquering Obstacles Through Hope, Humanity, and Creativity. Many of us are aware of the philosopher David Hume, who is a Scottish philosopher. He lived in the age of the Enlightenment in the 1700s, and he said this: artists, he said, enable us to see better life's meaning. And so the artists we're going to discuss with you today will help us capture that. And turning on to our next slide, the first artist we're going to look at today, Blythe, on slide number 2, is Beethoven. And more specifically, Beethoven was quite a prolific composer, as many of you, I'm sure, are already aware of. And the Ninth Symphony in particular is what we're going to be looking at, because what Beethoven did is he used the fourth movement. He used the words of Ode to Joy, which was a German poem written, as it's mentioned here, by Friedrich Schiller. And Beethoven, being German, probably was very aware of that poet, who certainly came a bit before his time. Now, the Ode to Joy is encompassed in the fourth and final movement of the Ninth Symphony. And what was so earth-shattering with this, it was the first time that a composer incorporated singers and a chorus. And when the singers were there, they were doing this individually, and then a chorus would back them up. And so it was revolutionary. And the other revolutionary aspect of his creation is probably what I'm about to say. He had a handicap, and I'm sure many of you know that it was deafness. And as he composed his symphonies, his hearing got worse and worse. And by the time he composed this Ninth Symphony, it was gone. He did it all from knowing what the timing and the notes would be speaking to the audience. And he then conducted that first symphony with the chorus encompassing the words of Schiller. And when it was finished, he received a standing ovation. And what was so interesting is he didn't hear it. And his back was to the audience because he was conducting. So someone who was on stage with him turned him around to see it so that he could encompass what they were seeing and realize that his revolutionary moment paid off, I guess, for him. And the Ode to Joy, if you're familiar with it, you know that what it represents triumph of universal brotherhood against war and desperation. Now, Beethoven himself put to music a poem that praises and wishes for freedom and peace between all peoples. Now, moving on to slide number 3, what we have here are the words of Schiller's poem, but obviously it's the English translation. It was certainly originally done in German. Now, what I would like to have you do, and all of us do at this time, we are going to play just this version from the fourth movement of a more contemporary group singing some of these words, Ode to Joy, which have obviously been a bit changed to go with the modern music. And there is a symphony in the background, one of the symphonies from Pennsylvania that accompanies this music choral group. So with that, Blythe is going to put on the music as we read the words. Thank you, Blythe. Now moving on to the next slide. Over the years, the music of Beethoven has become much more than popular. It's a piece that represents nothing less than a philosophy for humanity. Beethoven, the composer, philosopher, was a man who suffered more than we can imagine, and yet he retained optimism and a sense of hope that all of us can admire. He believed wholeheartedly in the goodness of humanity, the power of love, joy, unity, tolerance, and peace to overcome and to endure. We inherently know and feel these aspirations when we hear Beethoven's Ninth and are drawn to it musically and hopefully morally. Beethoven's Ninth has become synonymous with many important political and social movements over the course of time. And let me give you a couple of examples. In 1985, for example, the European Union chose Beethoven's Fourth Movement, or with the Ode to Joy, as the official anthem of the EU, celebrating their shared values of freedom, peace, and solidarity. And in 1989, Leonard Bernstein from the United States conducted a version of Beethoven's Ninth at the Brandenburg Gate to celebrate the fall of the Berlin Wall, where he changed Schiller's word joy to the word freedom. So it is this universal perspective that makes the Ode to Joy so special in expressing our desire for happiness and brotherhood. From the Americas to Europe and really to the rest of the world, Beethoven's music and Schiller's words have been the carriers of this universal message, a message that transcends the boundaries of time and culture. The message is filled with optimism and fundamental faith in what is best in humanity. And this probably could not be more relevant today. Moving on to our concluding slide on Beethoven, Blythe. So in summary, Beethoven, in spite of his growing disability, believed wholeheartedly in the goodness of humanity, the power of love, joy, unity, tolerance, and peace to overcome and endure. And so did our next artist. Our next artist on the next slide is someone that perhaps all of us are somewhat familiar with, Fitz Henry Lane. Now, what I have found here, I found his obituary that was in 1865. He lived from 1804 to 1865. He overlapped Beethoven a little bit. Beethoven was a little bit before that. But this obituary written by William Winter wrote for the newspaper in Gloucester, and he became a friend and very knowledgeable, certainly, of Fitz Henry Lane. So this excerpt from the obituary, which appeared in the newspaper, says, "In the industrial, genial, and unpretending life of Fitz Henry Lane, we see an illustration most touching to all who knew him, of the great truth that genius is always energetic, cheerful, modest, and self-possessed, and that while it does not seek its own, it strives continually and patiently to beautify and enable whatever comes within its influence." So with that, I'd like to move on to the next slide. And this slide is a portrait of Lane when he was younger. This was done by Robert Cook in 1835. And Lane at this time would have been 31 years old. And I'm going to backtrack a little bit and talk about him, and then we'll look at two of his paintings before we move on to Jerry. Lane, when he was 18 months old, developed the loss of mobility in his legs. His legs then became useless, and he used crutches then for the rest of his life. But Fitz Henry Lane was never defined by this handicap. He triumphed over it. As a child, he was often unable to play with other children. He turned to drawing, and we can then understand the impetus for his career. In adulthood, he was then, first of all, a lithographer or a printmaker, and then a painter. And the basis for both of those remains the drawing. And the drawing is what he then transitioned to and did the last decades of his life. His drawing, his printing, and his painting evolved into a style called luminism, which again, many of us know much about, which is the use of pervasive light in his paintings. In later decades, most of that light is depicted in his marine paintings. Lane was born in Gloucester, and he remained there most of his life. But in adulthood, he often visited Maine, which he loved. The next two paintings, or the only two that I have of Lane this morning, will be each from one of those places. The next painting that we're going to look at, or the first one of his, if we move the slide, is a painting from his hometown, Gloucester, Massachusetts. It's entitled Gloucester from Rocky Neck. And Rocky Neck was just the point. We're probably, if this were alive, we'd be sitting on Rocky Neck ourselves, looking out at the town of Gloucester as he saw it in that era. And I'm going to talk about this painting now. This painting, it was done, as we can see, in 1844. And it was the time when he was really beginning to transition from being a lithographer to a painter. And this then descends directly from lithography, particularly town views. And let me go on to explain why. In these town views, Lane depicts vistas that have a map-like quality in their attempt to show every building and activity in a town. And the reason he got used to doing that is because the viewers of these paintings, and before that, the viewers of the lithography or the printmaking, knew those buildings. They worked in them, they lived in them. And so Lane took every single moment to get them as accurately as he could. He sketched here, as we already mentioned, from high ground called Rocky Neck, and it's elevated above the harbor traffic, which gives us clear views then of both the boats on the water and certainly the town beyond it. But if we look at the foreground, we're seeing something completely different. It's showing what the rural part of Gloucester was like. On the bottom right, we see sheep. We see a man with a rifle and his dog. And in the middle, we see a man pointing to the town. This probably would not have been exactly what he saw at the time, but yet it depicts what Gloucester was like in his era. It was a time when trade was occurring in Gloucester. Trade occurred with smaller ships, and that bespeaks this in this painting. Later on, that trade closed because the ships got too large to go into Gloucester. And Gloucester later on became more of a fishing village, which I believe still occurs a lot of that today. Now, the share of Gloucester's inner harbor here was still very rural then in Lane's day. It's as shown here, as I already mentioned, by the sheep, by the dog, the rifle, and the harbor is full of a wide variety of boats, and the city shines in the distance. So every building, as I already mentioned, is accurately drawn. The sky now is something else I'd like to look at with you. It's layered in light and dark clouds. So luminism is here also. But luminism here is also a lithography practice used to differentiate layers in the sky. The foreground shows land's kind of dark arch right on our side of the harbor. And this arch is the separation then between the sheep that are on an angle, and they replicate the boats on the same angle. And the boat on the far right is headed off into the shadows. So looking at this painting that he did of what he saw in 1844 in his hometown, this painting slowly is growing out of the lithography techniques. He has included an astounding amount of detail, but without a single focal point that provides a dominant emotion. The dominant emotion comes later in his work. But this is a very good transition painting. He has captured a clear, crisp light, and the painting actually has, though, a static quality that is still like a lithograph. But in the next few years, Lane would learn to immerse himself into a scene and to bring us into it to create atmosphere and space. And the next painting that we'll look at now on the next slide will show that. And we're familiar with this painting because those of us in the San Diego area and have certainly worked or been at the Timken Museum recognize this. We're lucky enough to have this painting done in 1852 entitled Castine Harbor and Town. And as I mentioned, as the prelude to Lane, he visited Maine. So Maine and Massachusetts were basically his two environments as he matured. Now, in this time of 1852, Lane also was transitioning into what became very popular in that day. And some of us know this as transcendentalism. Transcendentalism was written about quite prolifically by Walden Pond, by Thoreau and other writers of this same era. And I was surprised to learn through this book I'm going to show in front of my face it's called Fitz H. Lane, An Artist's Voyage Through 19th Century America. And this book was written by James Craig only in 2006, so only 15 years ago. And he speaks in there of how the transcendentalism philosophy began to seep into his paintings. And if you recall from maybe studying Walden Pond, transcendentalism means that God or a light force can be found everywhere, not merely in church buildings, but certainly outside in scenes wherever we want to find God. So our great American luminous painter, and he was also called the master of the frozen moment. And this master of the frozen moment can certainly be seen in this painting in which the water is calm with distant hills clothed in soft light. So we see here a sunset through pink and purple clouds. And then we see boats of different sizes, and in those boats, and you can see this more clearly when you see the actual painting, he depicts people in those boats, women in bonnets and men in straw hats. And then on the decks, we see the men who are the crew who make those boats move for the people who might be out sightseeing. We also see clusters of clouds, as you can see in the sky in the distance. And I already mentioned the colors that he uses, which would be white, gray, and pinkish. but they highlight also those same rectangular type of buildings in the distance, but they are not as prominent as they were in the previous painting. And once again, he is sitting above, and this one doesn't tell us where, but it would be on the shore at higher ground. And in both this painting and the previous one from Gloucester, he drew it first, went back to a studio, and then painted it. And that was his style. So the single focus, which he now has evolved into, can probably be said as this is a magical view of Castine Harbor and town. So Lane's genius is as a luminous painter, emphasizing lightness, the sky, and open waters. He has certainly been regarded as one of the foremost painters of his generation. And that's emphasized also in the book that I just mentioned to you. So now, as I transition to my last slide, I would like to say that Lane's works inspire us, hopefully, to rise to the ideals of humanity. He certainly did, overcoming his disability with his legs. Beethoven overcame his disability with hearing loss. In his works, and in particular his Ninth Symphony, which I emphasize today, through its gigantic, irrefutable musical power, invite us to endless renewal and possibility. Now, before Jerry picks it up with talking about other artists who will help renew us to endless possibilities, we'd like to just stop briefly, and I'll move back to Blythe to see if we have any comments or additions or questions that refer to Beethoven or to Fitz Lane.
So far we just have a comment saying nicely done, giving you a and then I just wanted to, we don't have any questions, but I just wanted to say that something it reminded me of was the Hudson River School painters, and kind of just that transition of, kind of looking at nature versus transitioning into more industrial. But yeah.
And that was beginning simultaneously with him, but mass communication was not in vogue, and later historians would look at what was done in various parts, give it the name, and we later on want to make connections, and perhaps there were, because they were into art, learning about it in various forms. So thank you so much for that, Blythe, because that, I think, enhanced this era. So now, if we have no more, as I already said, my cohort here is going to continue with talking about wonderful artists who overcame their own disabilities and are inviting us to renewal and possibility. Jerry?
Thank you, Barbara, for your very inspiring comments. In particular, your comments about the ideals of humanity, endless renewal, and possibilities lead me to think of a work done almost 200 years earlier by a man who also suffered under a handicap, one that could not be modified with scientific advances at the time. And I'm speaking, of course, of Giovanni Francesco Barbieri, also called Il Guercino, or the squinty-eyed one, that lived between 1591 and 1666 in Italy. Here we see two portraits of Il Guercino, one on the left done about 1623 by Ottavio Leoni, of a young man. It's very easy to see his affliction. He's terribly cross-eyed. Research indicates that perhaps he had a very, very lazy eye. And the second portrait is a self-portrait done when he's more of an adult, about 44 years old. You can see that he very artfully masks the drama of his affliction and shows a very professional painter with that beautiful lace collar, his palette and brushes, the very portrait of a portraitist or a painter. And let's move to the next slide, and you'll see one of his more outstanding painters. In this paintings in this really beautiful Baroque painting depicting the return of the prodigal son, done in about 1654-55 in Italy. This is a painting telling the story of the parable of the prodigal son told by Luke in the Bible, the book of Luke. Barbieri's extraordinary ability to imply depth and the luminous quality in his robes, that wonderful use of color, all is displayed. Some researchers say perhaps the loss of clear sight in one of his eyes caused the other eye to develop an extraordinary ability to see depth and color that enabled Barbieri to reproduce those colors and that depth on canvas. In this beautiful painting, all of the emotion of love and forgiveness shine forth in the father's outstretched arms, wrapping his son in his own robe, grabbing his arm. The embarrassment and the sorrow and the shame of the son is very clear. The skill of the painting, look at the shadow of the cloth he's holding to his eye on his arm. The skill of the painter is outstanding. The servant in the back to the rear of the father is opening the door to a celebration, welcoming all of us, actually. All of us come into the celebration. Enjoy the return of my son. This is a Counter-Reformation picture, probably commissioned by Pope Gregory XV of the Catholic Church at the time, encouraging the faithful that perhaps were led astray by the Protestant Reformation to come back to the church, and telling them they would be welcomed with opened arms. What an incredible indication, again, of hope and forgiveness by an artist that definitely has overcome that disability shown by his eyes. Now, let's move on to the next slide. This is an enlargement of the sun. Look at the detail of the tears on this young man's eye and his chest. You could almost swear that they are wet. It makes you almost want to touch the painting, of course, never done. But this shows the incredible skill that Barbieri used to create this work of art. Terrific job, Blythe, for putting this slide together for me. Now we're going to jump forward exactly to a modern time. This is a gentleman that most people know, more of a contemporary, a little bit later than Fitzhenry Lane, Vincent van Gogh. To me, no discussion of artists with obstacles to overcome can be complete without at least a nod to Mr. Van Gogh. He is an artist that underwent excruciating depression, mental instability, ill health, basically surviving only due to the support and love of his brother Theo. And passing away, he passed away at a sanatorium in southern France, almost penniless, unfortunately. Ironically, at the end of his life, his work was beginning to be appreciated, as so frequently happens, and he was starting to achieve the popularity that he desired. Now, of course, he's one of the most acclaimed artists of all time, and has an incredible museum dedicated to all things Van Gogh in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. If you ever have a chance to visit it, I encourage you to do so. So much is written and spoken and presented about Van Gogh. I'm not going to take the time to go any further really into his other works. We don't have the time available, but I included this painting. It's one of the last paintings he did before his death, and it shows the enormous challenges to his mind and his psyche at the time. The world is actually fortunate that there are apparently in existence about 600 letters from Van Gogh to his brother Theo, and about 40 from Theo to Van Gogh, which help understand their relationship. And it describes what Van Gogh's feeling while he's painting. They're all archived now and under study, but in these letters, Van Gogh described his belief that the effect of color went beyond the descriptive He said that color expresses something in and of itself. He prescribed color as having a psychological and moral weight, as amplified by garish reds and greens when he wanted to express the terrible passions of humanity. Yellow meant the most to him because to him it symbolized emotional truth. He used yellow typically for sunlight, life, and for God. This helps one understand that the heavy daubs and slashes of paint that you see in some of his paintings, you'll notice that it's not a smooth surface, it's very rough, and there are ridges that are where he used his palette knife and heavy brushes to show his strong emotions during his paintings. The turbulence of his emotions physically show in his paintings. It's a little difficult to see on a computer, but I think you can kind of get a feel. This painting is one of the thickest that I've had a chance to see. The daubs are actually ridges on the canvas. And here again, toward actually the last month of his life, you see this path going off into the sky, the bright sheaves of wheat leaning toward the same direction of the path, and that flock of crows going off into darkness. Is it evening? Is it night? Is it his psyche? We don't know, but it's a very evocative painting. As you may know, it is said that Van Gogh shot himself. He was found with a revolver, suffering a gunshot wound in a field close to the room he was currently living. Although initially treated by a doctor, that wound worsened and Van Gogh passed away within about 30 hours of having been shot. Although historically reported as a suicide, there are some comments recently that say that actually there were a group of young boys playing in the field next to Van Gogh with a gun, and a shot went awry and struck Van Gogh. Van Gogh, not wanting the boys to get into trouble, had them give him the gun, and he just didn't tell anybody. And then he was discovered with the wound. Who knows what is true? That's a nice story. It would serve to celebrate his love of other people, even though he had terrible difficulty interacting with them. And we just want to celebrate his life, although I believe he overcame his challenges throughout by his expressions of emotion through his paintings. And now let's move on to another contemporary, Paul Cézanne. This is another contemporary of Van Gogh's. Paul Cézanne, not particularly known for his challenges, but in fact, he was terribly challenged during a period of his life. He had terrible disagreements with his father. They were completely estranged, did not communicate at all during this period. He was surrounded by the Impressionists of the time and disagreed completely with what they were doing. He was a transitional artist, bridging from the post-Impressionist and to the Expressionist period. Van Gogh did that, but Cézanne took it a step further. They're both French, they're both post-Impressionistic painters, and their works laid the foundation for a transition to a 19th century conception of artists who are endeavoring to present a radically different world of art to the 20th century. He was born to a farmer, a well-to-do family, actually, a successful banker, not a farmer, excuse me, that's the next artist. Anyway, a successful banker. Obviously, that banker had different ideas for his son. He did not want him to become a painter. He wanted him to read for law and send him to law school. Cézanne went to law school, but at the same time was studying painting on the side. He eventually walked away from law school and moved to Paris to study painting, started studying with Camille Pissarro, one of the most famous painters of the time. He, however, began to disagree with Pissarro, and because Paul Cézanne saw the world in architectural forms, and his style was beginning to coalesce in a style that was different from most of the painters of the time. Now, this painting shows very much his style during his dark period, and I chose it because of the subject matter of today's presentation. You can begin to see, however, his fascination with architectural forms in the column of the tree that the penitent is leaning against. The circular, is it a face? Is it a knot in that tree? We don't know. But to me, the emotion shown in this painting is profound, and it shows how affected Paul Cézanne was at the time. Now, when he started to realize how negatively his moods and he felt his art had been affected by his disassociation with his father and with the other impressionists of the time, he chose to move. He took his mistress and they moved to the south of France to a small village where he could be more in solitude, away from everybody that was causing him anxiety. And he started to more explore and treat nature in the terms of cylinders, spheres, and cones. A tree trunk, in this particular example, became a cylinder. And as you look at some of the other later Cézanne paintings, you will realize that there are many architectural forms in those paintings, leading probably as a natural bridge to Picasso and his Cubism. Cézanne's desire to capture truth in art led him to explore the forms of architecture that are captured in nature. Also the perspective. Now this period in time is where stereoscopy is in view. You may remember, some of the older among us remember the viewers, the stereo viewers that used to have to look at travel pictures. They are like binoculars, but you hold them on a stick in front of your eyes, and there's two viewing ports, and then you put a slide behind the viewing ports, and it brings two pictures into a 3D view. And that's what Cézanne was experiencing. They were very, very popular at this point in time in France and in the world for that matter. And his paintings tried to bring those forms and shapes into more of a 3D, more of a present situation. It's not as flat a picture. And this individual grieving here, showing us his sorrow is very round, very much comes out of the picture toward you. His painting, Cézanne's painting, was codified and solidified his style by his moving away from the factors that created his challenges. So he listened to his architectural instincts and his artistic instincts and moved into his own, overcoming those obstacles in his own way. And now let's look at another painter. This painter is a painter that the Timken is fortunate enough to have. This is George Inness, also a compatriot and a gentleman existing at the same time, a contemporary of Van Gogh and Cézanne. But this is a gentleman who grew up in America, in the US of A. Same era. He had his own challenges. You can see a more adult picture of him on the right in his studio, and a younger self-portrait on the left. This gentleman was quite an irascible individual. He was born in New Jersey, one of 13 children to a farmer. This is the artist that was the farmer. So the middle child, I believe he was the fifth child. He was diagnosed with epilepsy as a young child, which of course could not be dealt with scientifically at the time. I'm not so sure they do it well today, but he, because of his epilepsy and their inability to treat it, he was schooled at home, homeschooled, what we would call today, and therefore had no formal training. He taught himself to draw. When he was a teenager, his father bought him a grocery store, a kind of a general store. Nice father, but trying to give him some way to go forward and earn his own way in life. Unfortunately, he loathed being a store owner and would hide under the counter when customers came in and just painted all the time, closed the store when inappropriate and continued painting. After that, he basically left the store, gave it back to his father, and moved to New York City and worked with a map engraver. He became very skilled at engraving. He actually became a very popular illustrator with Currier and Ives, became well known throughout the US for those beautiful pictures. But he decided that he wanted to combine what he learned with his engraving skills and with his classes at the National Academy of Design and the Hudson River School of Artists. Blythe, you mentioned the Hudson River School earlier. This is a gentleman that also was very interested in the Hudson River style and started to experiment with it that he liked, but it didn't quite fit his style, what he wanted to do. So he decided that he wanted to combine the engraving and the disciplines that he'd seen the Hudson River artists do. Now, in 1851, a patron financed a trip for him to Europe. And let's move to the next slide. Blythe, thank you. In Europe, George Inness became enthralled by the Barbizon School. Now, the Barbizon School used looser brushwork, a palette of darker colors, and an emphasis on mood. And this Inness really spoke to Inness. And he developed this into a very personal style. As I mentioned, he was a contrarian, an unsettled man, often ill due to the epilepsy and prone to depressive mood swings. He had a reputation for throwing people out of his studio for asking stupid questions. Now, I think many of us would like to do that occasionally. But whatever contemporary artists were doing, he was going to do the exact opposite. He was fascinated with the European artists, as I said, in the Barbizon School, at a time when it was not the style in America. People were very nationalistic at the time. They only wanted to talk about America and American landscapes and the wild, wild West. George Inness wasn't there. He was into the more esoteric, and the Barbizon School in Europe appealed to him. And it definitely changed his style. He reportedly was thrown out of an assembly with the Pope because he was ordered to take off his hat by one of the guards there, and he bopped the guard over his head to make him quit bothering him because he was looking at the art. Apparently, it is reported that that particular action got him expelled from from Italy. Obviously, he was seeing the Pope, and goes to show even more what of an irascible character he was. After that happened, he went home to America, and that was about 1860, and the US Civil War was starting to erupt. Given his epilepsy and other health reasons, he was not able to serve in the Civil War, but he was an abolitionist, and he held rallies, he raised money, he gave speeches, and all in all, traveled across the eastern part of America, the northeastern part of America, raising money for the cause. Now, his visibility served to change public opinion, because at that point, they had not appreciated Inness's paintings that much. but his emotional support of the abolitionist movement changed public opinion. And the people in America started to realize that it wasn't that he was that fond of European art. What he was fond of was the style of introspection. And the art was interpretive rather than descriptive. So he became by the end of the Civil War, very famous as one of America's great landscape artists. Now, after that time, he went back to Europe. And while he was in Europe this second time, he became enthralled with, and I'm probably going to mangle this pronunciation, my apologies, but it's called Swedenborgianism, the opinion that everything in nature had a corresponding relationship with something spiritual, and all received an influx from God in order to exist. Consciousness is a stream of thought, and mystical experiences shaped one's perspective toward nature. Now, this is why I chose this picture. This was 1873 in France, called The Monk, very self-explanatory. And as a follower of this particular spiritualist, Swedenborgianism, Innes felt that man, nature, and the divine were all in harmony. He described his paintings as civilized landscapes rather than wildernesses. There's the contrarianism between the American painters that were painting the wild, wild West very successfully, and he wants to paint man and his position with nature and his interaction with nature. The mystical component is manifested through the abstract handling of shapes, the plane trees there, the wall there. This is a very mystical painting. Softened colors, more of a tonal approach, as opposed to the luminism that, for instance, Fitzhenry Lane that Barbara spoke of earlier showed. This is a darker, more introspective, more mystic view. However, he does start to soften his colors as he moves later into his life. And if we'll go to the next shot, please, Beth. Here you have the Timken painting, Aricia, a city in Italy, outside of Rome. Now, this is his spiritual beliefs paramount, and it shows that he's moving into tonalism with the softer color. This is almost a mystical view. This is a year later than The Monk, so his painting style has progressed. This is looking across the plain to Rome in the far background, has a much softer focus and lighter paint colors. This is bringing this particular painting closer to the tonalist style, which he became known for a little bit later in his life. We see here his architectural approach. This is from his engraving background to the view of the town. The town shows the square and the rectangular buildings, the smoke plumes coming off of those buildings, showing the human inhabitants, and its round cathedral dome weighing the right side of this picture and the frame. This weight on the right side brings our eyes kind of down the painting across to that light colored path that takes your eye back to that Roman bridge, moving back across the picture to the left to the view of Rome in the far distance. Note those people moving across the bridge. There's some people with some stock, perhaps cattle and horses and some wagons moving across that bridge. And then as you go across the bridge, you see a cypress tree that comes up and drops your eye down to the shepherd with the sheep at the foot of the bridge, making sure that we don't miss that interaction. Perhaps a little fire over to the right under the arch there. All of these details are in us, showing the interaction of humans with nature and life in this particular picture. I think perhaps his nod to mysticism first of all, the kind of slight haziness of the view, but also if you go up to the sky, that beautiful late afternoon blue as the sun's just starting to set. If you look up to the top into the clouds, you can see a very slight crescent moon there. Those clouds getting thicker, perhaps over the city. Is that showing the involvement of man? We don't know, but this is a very mystical kind of painting showing his great thought and his belief that man and nature are involved. Not quite as luministic as Fitzhenry Lane shown in Barbara's earlier pictures, but every bit as thought-provoking and as involved in nature as Fitzhenry Lane. Now, this is George Inness, the father of American painting. During his last visit to Europe, he was in Scotland. And in 1894, so that would be 20 years about after this painting was done, he was traveling with his son. And according to his son, they had stepped out on a hillside to watch the sunset. And his father all of a sudden threw up his hands and said, "Oh my God, what a beautiful, how beautiful," fell to the ground and died. What a way to go. Very evocative of George Inness. And let's move to the next slide, Blythe. All of that involved with Ode to Joy, the joy of Beethoven's composition of the Ninth Symphony, and to Schiller's beautiful poem, Ode to Joy. Thank you for joining us. We hope you can overcome these great challenges, give your friendship to a friend, and celebrate all of these things with the Timken Museum. Now, the Timken is currently closed, unfortunately, as many others are today, using this particular in time to refresh its presentation to the public and to renew experience, to make it more inclusive so that everyone is able to enjoy the art. Remember the Timken. It will open, I'm sure, within months, and it has always been free to those that like to enjoy it. We hope that you come to see these works of art in person and embrace the beauty of art and its creativity. Hope you enjoyed this tour and Barbara and my presentation. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
So if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and or feel free to unmute yourself and have any questions or comments shared with us. So I'll just give everybody a moment for that. Let's see what we have in the chat. So Ava says, the theme of today's talk brings to my mind the biblical principle that after the physical, mental, and spiritual suffering in this world comes the blessings of eternal life with God for those who belong to him.
Nicely said.
And Ron Toby says, thoroughly enjoyed both presentations. And Henry says, thank you, hoping to be back soon.
Thanks, Ron and Toby.
Thank you so much, everybody. And if there are no more questions with that, I think we'll go ahead and end the presentation. So yes, I think we'll go ahead and end the presentation here. And we have these tours every Thursday at 11 a.m. If you'd like to join us next Thursday, we have one also at 11 a.m. and our docents will give a talk entitled Tell Me a Story, Narratives in Art. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Blythe.
Thank you, everyone.